reading this week, if you're reading through the Bible with us, comes from our history reading. And it comes from a remarkable period in Israel's life known as the time of the Judges. Now you might ask, why do I need to read this old book? What am I going to learn from such an ancient book? What can there be for me today? What can there possibly be for us today? She was still not sure what she read. So what could be there for us? But you know, in truth, there is hardly a difficulty, an immorality, or an evil committed in the period of the Judges that isn't prevalent, that's not prevalent today. The things that they were dealing with in this ancient book are the same things we deal with today. But history repeats itself. Humanity sins. Whatever it is. The same thing that these folks that were dealing with, the Israelites of that day, are the same things we deal with today. And there are lessons to be learned from this period of Israel's history. After entering Canaan and spreading out over the Promised Land, the Israelites managed only to maintain a loose national identity. There was no one ruler. Each of the tribal families governed itself. Indeed, during this period, Israel did not truly exist as a physical entity. There really wasn't an Israel. Instead, Israel was a theocratic society, recognizing only direct, divine guidance as its unifying governing principle. And so, without a strong national identity, it's not surprising that tribal independence gradually led to episodes of disobedience. And so it was for about 200 years or so, the time of the Judges. Israel fell into a predictable yet tragic cycle of behavior. The tribes of Israel gradually fell away from the worship of Yahweh alone, and they began to follow the lead of their Canaanite neighbors, and they began to worship idols and false gods. And because of this disobedience, God allows one of Israel's pagan neighbors to invade and conquer the chosen people, enslaving and oppressing them until the Israelites would turn and cry toward God and cry out in repentance and beg deliverance. And inevitably God would respond to their cries. And the divine solution was to call and establish a judge over the Israelite people. Guided and strengthened by God, this judge would bring about the means of Israel's deliverance. But Israel's disobedience and loyalty to God only seemed to last as long as the lifetime of any one judge. And when that judge would die, their loyalty would be gone again, and they would become disobedient toward God. And quickly they would revert back to those worthless idols and gods of their neighbors, and the cycle would begin again. Disobedience, judgment, deliverance through the hand of God's chosen judge. That judge would die, the folks would become disloyal again, and so it was, over and over and over again, this cycle. Thus our reading for this morning begins, the Israelites again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, after Ehud died. And then God raised up Israel's fourth great judge, a woman named Deborah. Now I want to talk about how remarkable that is in the history of Israel today. There's something else that I want to share with you. And so enough of the background to the book of Judges. There was a time when you could enlist in the army under the buddy plan. Now, I don't know whether that plan still exists for enlistees today or not, but there was a time when you could enlist in the army under the buddy plan. You and a friend could enlist together. and be guaranteed to at least be placed together during basic training. And basic training was such a shock to many young men that they went AWOL, A-W-O-L, absent without leave. I know there were 3 in my basic training company in Fort Dix, New Jersey, who went AWOL. I know there was a time before I got out of the Army, I was stationed at Fort Meade, Maryland. We'd have to go down to the police station or the airport, pick up AWOLs and bring them back to the stockade at Fort Meade. AWOL, absent without leave. For these young men, suddenly gone was the family system. No more mom and dad and siblings and girlfriends and buddies and hanging out on the corner and going to the movies and all this stuff. Suddenly, many of these young men were facing discipline like they had never faced before, with a drill sergeant breathing down their neck 24 hours a day, with incessant pressure and nobody to share it with. Many of these young men broke and went AWOL, in effect ruining their young lives. This buddy plan and someone to at least lean on and help you through this great period of difficulty and that perceived enemy, the drill sergeant, saved many a young man from going AWOL. Well, today's text offers similar advice on how to overcome one's difficulties and enemies. When we think about a biblical story where the apparently weak underdog conquers the large, well-armed enemy, everyone usually comes up with a favorite standard, which is what? Weak person against strong, big, well-armed person. Come on, tell me the story. David and Goliath. That's probably the story we usually come up with. David and Goliath. But the story of Deborah, Barak, and Jael, which we would find if we read on over it. And if you were reading through the Bible this week, you knew who she was. She was the one that drove the tent peg through the temple of the enemy of Israel. Well, the story of these 3 defeating Sisera and his huge army of iron chariots is really another David and Goliath story. Only in this version, with the female lead, the key to victory over the oppressor is found in teamwork. Whereas David's confrontation with the larger-than-life Goliath was a one-man show, the defeat of Sisera's soldiers and the release of the Canaanite stranglehold comes about through the supportive, cooperative efforts of these 3, Deborah, Barak, and Jael. David's victory brought an end to the fear the giant Goliath had driven into the hearts of Israel's soldiers. But the triumph of the 3 from our story today brought about the destruction of all those who had orchestrated Israel's oppression. Together they defeated Jabin and Sisera's military might, and they set all of Israel free. Sometimes, folks, it only takes one problem, one barrier, to prevent us from claiming and keeping the promised land that the Lord has intended us to inhabit. Sometimes all it takes is one problem or one barrier to do that. And whatever the problem is in your life, it is your own personal Goliath. Whatever that problem is you're facing or have faced, it's your own personal Goliath. This Goliath might be a co-worker you simply cannot get along with and let undermine your productivity at work. This Goliath could be addiction to drugs, alcohol, gambling, or sex. Your Goliath could be the inability to make decisions. You could be a couch, you could have a couch potato engagement. Disengagement from the Word. Your Goliath could be your weight, or your height, or your baldness, or your gray hairs. It could be just about anything. But it only takes one problem, one impediment, to keep you at arm's length from God's plan for you. It's all it takes. One thing. One problem. And with so much at stake, is there any doubt that like David slowly swinging his slingshot and taking aim, we must put all of our strength toward knocking down this enemy, this barrier, this barricade. The problem may be that while our road may be blocked at only one point, it's likely that the way is cut off by Sisera's 900 chariots rather than a single giant warrior. Our biggest barrier to the fulfilled life that God offers us may be something like insecurity or mistrust or depression. And all of these can be described by one word. But they are caused by a complex combination of events and experiences that have gradually grown stronger over the years. Now what you have is a roadblock that stands on 1,800 legs instead of 2 feet. And the answer to this problem comes from today's lesson. A strong, seemingly overwhelming enemy can only be defeated through one technique: teamwork. You don't need to battle the barricades in your life all by yourself. We have a community of faith, folks. Community of faith that stands beside us. You've shook one another's hands and gave one another hugs today. You've laughed together. Maybe some of you have shed a tear together today. We have a family, a community of faith to stand beside us, and brothers and sisters, a cloud of witnesses behind us who've gone on to be with the Lord. And these together help us move forward. If only we will learn to listen to their voices and let them help us. The story of the victory that Deborah, Barak, and Jael recounted for Israel demonstrates that there are all types of people who will be able to help us draw closer to the promised land. We don't have to do it on our own. Israel's victory, folks, didn't come through brute strength. In fact, by using 2 women to bring about the end of the Canaanites' oppression over Israel, the text turns the attention away from military might. God's saving intentions come about because Barak listens to a woman who is acting as both judge and prophet of Israel. It is obedience to God's will as spoken by Deborah and not Israel's soldiers that gave Barak the victory. The victory came only because he listened to Deborah and because he was obedient to the words that she spoke. It was a judge who raised her voice, never a weapon. Deborah guided the people over the Canaanite enemy. We face and have faced Goliaths, both as individuals here today and as a community of faith. You together have faced Goliaths. you adopt the buddy plan and allow someone or some other congregation to help you defeat your greatest enemies. Let's stand together, arms linked, through faith in Christ. I don't want a one of you here today, not a one of you here today, to ever go AWOL for the family of God. Not the one of you. It's happened in the past. And you could probably name some names as you think back that are now AWOL for the family of God. I don't want one of you going AWOL. If you need some help, find yourself a buddy. If you know someone who needs some help, offer to be that buddy. And walk together. Jesus had to walk that lonesome valley, and he had to walk it all by himself. But I don't agree with the other lyrics on that song. You and I, we don't have to walk that lonesome valley by ourselves.